Hello, boys and girls. This is Dr. Parker. Today I'm going to read a story to you, but before I do, I wanted to tell you that, some books have valuable lessons we can learn. So I want you, as I'm reading this book, to see if you can figure out what lesson can we learn from this story. The story I'm going to read is The Tale of Peter Rabbit. It's written by Beatrix Potter. I hope you enjoy it. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a blanket and a basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straightway to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuce and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. Then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of the cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on the hands and knees planting young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop that!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe among the potatoes. After losing his shoes, he ran on 4 legs and went faster. He might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately ran into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears. But his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and begged him to try to free himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind. Peter rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently Peter sneezed. "Kerchoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. He tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor. He was tired of running after Peter and went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright. He had not the least idea of which way to go. Also, he was very damp from sitting in that can. After a time he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked. There was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer, and Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Soon he came to a pond. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still. Peter thought it best to go away. He had heard about cats from his cousin Benjamin Bunny. Peter went back toward the tool shed. Suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. Peter scurried underneath the bushes, but soon, as nothing happened, he came out, climbed upon a wheelbarrow, and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned toward Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. But Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner. Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little blue jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten away blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him all the way until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. And that's the end of the story. Poor little Peter, asleep. Now, what do you think we can learn from this book? Well, let's think about it a minute. What did Peter's mama tell him at the beginning of the story? That's right. She said, do not go into Mr. McGregor's garden. And what did Peter do? He went in. He didn't remember that she said, or maybe he did remember and did it anyway. She had told him don't go in there because his father had gotten caught and was put into a pie. But Peter went anyway, and what happened? Well, he got all wet, he was frightened, he was chased by Mr. McGregor, and by the time he got home, he was too tired to enjoy all of the yummy food that his siblings got to eat. So what can we learn from all of that? Well, maybe we should do as we're told. Take the advice of your mama and people who are older than you. What do you think? Let me know. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Keep reading.